Hello, and welcome more officially now to the first space where we will have a first introduction in the history of this incredible sacred island of Delos. We are very privileged today because we have two archaeologists. Okay, Themis Vakoulis from the Greek side. The Greek archaeologist team of Delos is on our side from day one, which is 5 years ago. And they have been working hand in hand with us. But this year, we have the privilege to have also the French side of the Delos archaeological search. And we have Véronique Chankowski, who is the director of the French School of Athens, Archaeological School of Athens. And we are very happy to give her the, let's say, longer part of the introduction. But before Véronique takes over, to give you an overview, which is impossible in 20 minutes, but she will do her best. And maybe if you want to speak only 15 minutes, that's fine too. Then you would have a few minutes for questions. In any case, it's not possible to tell you everything. Actually, it's just opening a little window so that you get a glimpse in all those things that happened on this place for centuries and millennia. But now, before I hand over to Véronique, it's up to Themis, who will be also doing the Greek, no, the English, no, the Greek. The Greek. You will be also doing the Greek tour. Mantha is going to do the English, and Véronique, no, not you. You are going to do the French. So we have 3 tours in 3 languages you can choose. So,
good afternoon to everybody. On behalf of the director of the F48 of Antiquities of the Cyclades, Dr. Athanasoulis, who had to be absent today, I welcome you on the island. I'm sure that your presence here will be very helpful in order to enhance this initiative to speak the word, to talk about the climate change and the extreme dangers that we shall be facing very soon for such monuments. I will not say no more, and I will give the microphone to Professor Chankowski.
Thank you very much, and welcome in this beautiful and extraordinary place of the island of Delos. Delos is a site that is particularly dear to my heart because I have been working there for 30 years as a researcher, so it is really my homeland as a researcher. And what you see here is the result of 150 years of archaeological exploration by the French School of Athens. And what you see is also the result of the strong energy and commitment of the F48 of the Cyclades to protect the archaeological remains. And we collaborate deeply in this respect and very efficiently. We have close relation with the F48 and we work very well together. We're all concerned about what we're seeing and the risks that climate change and over-tourism pose to Delos. And Delos must be preserved because it has a unique message to convey to us. And I'm trying to give you a glimpse into this huge history. It's, as Alexandra said, it's not possible to tell everything, but we will have time also to discuss, and we will have time to enjoy the walk through the remains, which is also a very important aspect to learn about Delos. You have to see it and you have to feel what the remains explains to you. I'm possibly sitting it's better and more comfortable. So what I'm going to explain you is both my testimony of a researcher and as director of the French school, knowing Delos as a contemporary site, but also knowing Delos as an ancient society. So it's a travel through decades, ages, and centuries. And since the topic of this session is about human settlements, I will focus on the lessons that we can learn from the history of Delos about living together, about coexistence in a globalized world. Because I believe as an historian of the ancient world that Delos is a perfect place to observe what happened in antiquity about this phenomenon, about coexistence in a globalized world. Today, almost no one lives permanently on Delos. And however, in ancient times, the island had a population of almost 30,000 people during the first century. Can you imagine that? So it means a lot, speaking about the environment and speaking about the organization of human settlement. It is a long story. As you know, Delos is well known as the birthplace of two very important deities of the Greek religion, Apollo and Artemis, and this is the basis of the development of the island. But we will focus more here on the settlement of Delos, which is a long story spanning several centuries. Roughly, it started during the 7th century BC, at the moment when the cult of Apollo and Artemis started to develop, and with this development started the settlement. And it continues to basically the beginning of late antiquity. And what is interesting is that the population grew so much in connection with the constraints of its environment that we see recurring trends and patterns. During so many centuries, there are patterns that you can recognize and that are repeated along the time. So I'm not going to tell you the entire story of Delos. You can just refer to this book that I wrote recently, which is in Greek, in English, and in French, and you can find it at the French School of Athens and in any good bookstore online. But so I'm not telling you the entire story because I want you to walk through the remains and not only to listen to me. But I'm just going to highlight some major trends that will be of interest for us. One very important thing that you have to keep in mind is that Delos is both a sanctuary and a commercial hub in the Aegean during antiquity. It is called an emporion in ancient Greek, a port of trade, basically. But it is very interesting to think that the sanctuary and the commercial hub, the port, are deeply connected. Very often we imagine Greek religion in a romanticized way, inherited from the 19th century, with men and women dressed in white, performing purification rites and rituals. And it's maybe counterintuitive to imagine the sanctuary of Delos overrun with noisy crowds, performing rituals and trading. But that was the reality. And in such a small space, this means that Delos was a world of coexistence. Coexistence is really the key word here. Coexistence of the activities, but also coexistence of the people. Especially after the conquest of Alexander the Great in the east, Delos, being a commercial hub in the Aegean, enjoyed an influx of people from diverse origins. Some of them were Greeks, some other not. And we know from the inscriptions here on Delos that communities from Egypt, communities from Syria, from Lebanon, and also a Jewish community had taken roots here on Delos. And soon after that came also the Italians from Greek origin and the Romans, which means that during what we are calling the Hellenistic period, that is basically the time after the conquest of Alexander the Great, this moment when the Greek world was enlarged to different other civilizations, Greek was the common language, and at least the common written language. But for sure, other Eastern languages could also be heard here. Language brings common ideas. This is one basic approach of language. So having this koine, this Greek language in common, people shared the same concepts. People shared the same ideas that were circulating in this world. They shared also a lot of patterns in a common architecture, and we will see it during the tour. The settlement of Delos, the town that developed in parallel with the sanctuary and the port, the town was inhabited by different people from different origins, but the architecture basically is a building that is sharing the same concept, the same architectural concepts. You don't have anything very, that we could say, called exotic here. What you will see is Greek architecture. And it is true also for religion. You see just in front of me this temple here. If you turn your head and in this direction, you see this temple, which is very much looking like a Greek temple. It is a Greek temple, but the cult is of the deity Isis, the Egyptian deity Isis. So you see, this is a good example of these koine. Common Greek language, common ideas, common concepts, common architecture, but it means that people were living in this globalized model of housing. Differences came from their social differences. But Delos was a place where this common koine was circulating and was adopted by the people. It doesn't prevent them from having huge differences, however. One of the differences that between communities that we can observe here in Delos is the religion. They had different religions. This means that the traditional Greek gods of the polytheism were not their familiar gods for most of them. Apollo and Artemis were for a long time the main deities here of Delos, and Delos developed during the archaic and the classical period because of the fame and the celebrity of the god Apollo and the goddess Artemis. But during Hellenistic times, it was not the case anymore. They were not the only known and important gods of this place. The foreign communities, the Eastern communities, brought on the island their own gods, named Serapis, named Isis, named Astarte, named Baal, and they came from different places of the Eastern Mediterranean. So these foreign inhabitants adapted, and they also introduced their cults and their rituals into the habits of the Greek communities. And what makes this coexistence possible? Generally speaking, it is, of course, the polytheistic nature of Greek religion, but here in Delos, more specifically, it is the sacred nature of the island. What does it mean that the island is sacred? It's not just because there is a sanctuary here. It's a very specific process. Since the 6th century before Christ, and even more so in classical times, regulations has defined the sacred nature of this territory, which was entirely dedicated to Apollo. It means that the island belongs to the god. And it means that it doesn't belong to anyone else. And it is a very important point here. This is not a question of mysticism. This is rather a legal issue, an administrative and a rational approach. Being sacred means being neutral. Delos was not dominated by a specific power because of this situation. It was not an island that carried the voice of a single imperialist power. It was a place where all political tendencies could be expressed. And as it was sacred, no weapons were allowed there. So you could observe on the sanctuary many political tendencies, and especially through the inscriptions that were displayed through the sanctuary, especially, and the port, as written monuments expressing different informations coming from different powers of the Mediterranean. So it was a sacred place, which means a neutral place where political tendencies could be expressed. But don't turn it into a lost paradise either. The inhabitants of Delos in ancient times also had their business mafias, their intolerant behavior, they had their violence. Thousands of slaves were sold right where you were standing when coming into the island. But it was a resilient society. The inhabitants of this small island have experienced major geopolitical changes over the centuries. Really major changes, like the Athenian imperialism and then the conquest of Alexander the Great and then the domination of the different Hellenistic powers that developed in Greece, and then the Roman wars and the Roman domination. It's not small changes, it's really big challenges. And the people here on Delos, they were coming from different origins, from different communities, having different cults and different culture, but sharing Greek as a common language, as a koine, and displaying common ideas and concepts. So these people, these inhabitants, they were forced to accept these major geopolitical changes because they had no military power to resist. Remember, Delos is a sacred place, so there is no weapons here. No weapons should enter here. There is no wall to defend the cities. There is no army, nothing like that. So they had to accept the changes because they had no military power to resist. They learned to live with their environment, and they learned to adapt to different situations and to other communities. And in this sense, and I want to close this introduction with this, and then we can discuss about several aspects if you want. In this sense, Delos truly expresses the nature of Greek polytheism. What does polytheism actually mean? It means having a multitude of gods, but it also means believing that these gods and these goddesses, they can be Apollo, it can be Artemis, it can be the other Eastern deities that came here and developed here in Delos, a cult. Any god or any goddess can take human form. It is very characteristic of the polytheism. And if you remember the Iliad and the Odyssey of Homer, those texts show us how Greek polytheism means believing that it means that the person coming in front of you might be a god. He or she might be a human, but he also might be a god. And I will finish with that and very pleased to answer any of your questions you may have.
So we have a mic here, so whoever wants to ask a question, if you maybe introduce yourself very briefly before.
I'm Jochen, co-founder of World Human Forum. I do the icebreaker role. I would like to ask you, when we entered the sanctuary, we saw this new marble sculpture with 3 key words: oneness, wisdom, and life in different languages. Can you refer very briefly about these 3 key words, how they relate to the history of Delos? Oneness, wisdom, and life.
Thank you. So it's a hard question because the answer could be 4 hours, but I will try to be synthetic. I think that Delos has the power also to inspire different concepts and to also create some lessons and for today. I'm not sure that we have to refer obviously directly to Antiquity, because Antiquity had its own problems and its own solution, and we have to find our own solutions for our problems for today. But unity, it's what I was just saying about the koine. Unity is not the real fact that people were united here, but it is true that when you live on a small island and when you're a lot of people living in this small island, there is a necessity for creating an institutional organization, an organization for the daily life. And what is very impressive in the document that we have here, the architectural remains, but also thousands of inscriptions that bear witness about this situation. In antiquity, the communities of Delos, centuries after centuries, were able to create a common organization with representatives, with people in charge of different domains of urbanism, of organization of the port, of distribution of food and anything like that, of the organization of the market. So there is a real sense of what a city, what a civic community is here in Delos. And for me, this aspect of unity is created by the civic organization, the sense of the community. The sense of the community, it is also the connection with the sanctuary. I say that the island is sacred because which means that it belongs to Apollo, it belongs to the god, which is a very rational notion. The fact that it belongs to the god means that the people have to take care of it. And the sanctuary of Delos was a true enterprise with a lot of buildings, which means here you can imagine the salted air was the same, basically. So living in such an island in the middle of the Aegean means repairing a lot the building each year. And we see in the inscriptions how the city was organized in order to take care of the building and to organize some funding each year and to spare and to create a budget in order to have funding and to have solutions for the building. They also, of course, during the centuries and with the help of different powers, they were able to enrich the sanctuary with a lot of new buildings. They were also able to collect a lot of offerings in silver and gold, and all this was the money of the sanctuary. But the money of the sanctuary was also developing through economic activity, taxes and renting and leases of land and so on. So it was really an enterprise, and this enterprise belonged to Apollo, but it was the citizens and the inhabitants were in charge of this. And again, you have here the sense of the commons, which is something that existed here in Delos, and Delos couldn't exist without this sense of commons. And all these allowed the communities, the several communities of the island to exist through centuries, from basically the 8th, 7th century BC to late antiquity. And even after late antiquity, it's not over, because there were less inhabitants. The commercial port of trade was less active, but it was not a desertic island, however. So, and it continued over centuries not to be inhabited as much as it had been during the 2nd and 1st century BC, but it was a place for life always. So this is the continuity and the magic of the coexistence on Delos, which is a story of continuity.
Okay, thank you. Another question?
Yes.
Okay. Do we still have archaeological digging, or how do you call it?
Yeah. Excavations.
Excavations, yeah.
Yes, Delos is an archaeological park and it is protected for that. So it means that it is a place where we continue to study, to have archaeological research on the site, on the museum, because Delos is a reference. It has produced such a rich material in architecture, in epigraphy, about the inscriptions. You have the coins, you have the ceramics, you have the sculpture, you have anything. So it is a site which is a reference in the Mediterranean. And the long story of 150 years of research from the French School of Athens and also in collaboration with the Ephorate of the Cyclades has produced a lot of books, volumes, publishing the collections. And those collections, they enter in comparison with different other contexts in the Mediterranean, because Delos is a place where you can observe everything. So yes, we continue and we will continue for centuries, I do hope.
Okay, if there's one more question, Professor Schellnhuber.
Hello, I'm John. I look human, but I may be a god, actually. No. So now I have a very technical question. You said that it was a sacred place, and this was not so much a religious thing, but a legal thing. Now, what is the evidence for that? Is it known that there was once a law, actually, and how is the historical evidence for it? Was it inscriptions or our reports and so on? So I'm just interested in how overwhelming the evidence is.
Yes, thank you for your question. We have written sources for that. Literary texts in Thucydides, for instance, it's reported, but it is also attested through inscriptions, many inscriptions. We have thousands of inscriptions. You don't see this anymore now, but you have to imagine that Delos was a place like an open space, open access place, like we used to do nowadays with online information, but it was an open access place. You had inscription, written texts, written information, laws, decrees, lists about that, about different political and official informations.